For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and you're watching The Gist. Welcoming from Kabul, Bilal Sarwary, senior independent journalist in Afghanistan, one of Afghanistan's best-known journalists. Bilal, welcome to StratNews Global. Thanks for giving us time. Glad that we worked out this technically. But before we get into our discussion, I want to congratulate you, your wife, your family, a new member of the family, Sola, your new daughter, whose name also means peace.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you for your well wishes. Yes, we are blessed with a new member of our family, Sola, our daughter, and we decided in our family that we will name her Sola, peace, hoping that one day our beloved Afghanistan could also finally have peace, as we are fighting for peace, as we are hoping and dreaming of peace for generations.
Bilal, talking about peace, what's happening on the ground is just the opposite. We see the Taliban making extremely fast moves. Today itself, you've been talking about attacks in Kandahar, in Spin Boldak. Before that, in the weeks, we've seen in Badakhshan, in Badghis yesterday, where the Afghan Central Forces have reportedly seized back the center. But how do you see this fast push that the Taliban has been doing since the 1st of May?
Today, this morning, we had a second wave of large-scale Taliban attacks against the city of Now, which is a major provincial capital in western Afghanistan. It's the capital of Badghis province on the border with Turkmenistan. And when you talk about a city like Now, where all the districts in the province have fallen over the years, there was a lot of fighting. Afghans were forced to leave their homes and agricultural fields. They fled to the provincial capital thinking that it's safe. And now the people of Afghanistan are caught in this brutal and unending war in the province of Kandahar. We have reports of very, very heavy fighting, not only in the districts, but also in the city of Kandahar, the police station 7. We also have heavy fighting in the district of Arghandab, which is a strategic district sitting on the edge of the city. It's also a gateway into the city. It's the home of the popular pomegranates. And elsewhere, you have the same situation. So as a result of everyday fighting, as a result of violence, you have Afghans who are being forced in bigger numbers from their homes, and they're losing whatever little livelihoods, incomes, gardens, fruits, harvests that they may have had.
Bilal, I just want to play out a soundbite of the U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price when he was asked about the Taliban's swift moves, offensives, advances across Afghanistan, especially in the north. This is what he had to say, Ned Price.
Taliban continues with its military offenses in the north. Will the U.S. continue to diplomatically engage with them?
Well, right now we are supporting the intra-Afghan dialogue, and a couple things can be true at the same time. It is absolutely true that a political solution is the only way, again, to achieve that just and durable outcome that all parties want, and all parties seem to understand is the only end to 40 years of conflict. It's also true, again, that any government that comes to power at the barrel of a gun through force is not one that will have popular support. It is not one that will accrue assistance from the international community. It is not one that will have international legitimacy. And for all those reasons, it is almost certainly not one that will have durability. And what we seek, again, is a just and durable political outcome, and only through dialogue, in this case intra-Afghan dialogue, can that be achieved.
Bilal, the Taliban will not have legitimacy if it takes by the barrel of the gun and will not have international support. But we see the Taliban doing just the opposite. You have been talking about, especially in the north and northwest, the northeast. You were talking about Badakhshan, Badghis. Why is the Taliban making its advances in those regions, which are usually seen, even when you go back in history, as opposed to the Taliban, where Tajiks or Uzbeks are in majority there?
Well, first, it's important to mention that the Americans decided to get into talks with the Taliban,
Yeah.
alone, and they were branded as peace talks. The Afghan government was never on the table. The fate of the Afghan people was sealed behind closed doors. When the Afghan government was forced to release 6,000 Taliban leaders and commanders and fighters, the Americans said that that would mean that the Taliban would have to enter into meaningful and credible peace talks with Afghans, that there will have to be a comprehensive and permanent ceasefire, although the word reduction in violence was used. And I remember, as would your viewers, as would everyone else, that Zalmay Khalilzad, the U.S. envoy for peace, both under former administration, Trump administration, as well as within the Trump administration, famously tweeting, and he was touting this idea that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. By that he meant, that the Afghan government had to have meaningful talks, that there has to be a ceasefire. So one has to have sympathy for the Afghan government, despite all the mistakes that the government has made, failing to create a united front on peace, failing to bring political cohesion. Uh, Moving to your second question on why the Taliban are moving against major strategic provinces in the north, there are two reasons. Number one, these are provinces that do provide soldiers to the Afghan National Security Forces.
Yeah.
So it is giving the Taliban an incredibly upper hand on the battlefield if they can deny, the ANDSF providing provinces and districts so that no recruitment can take place. But they're also cutting out future opposition, because we have to remember these are the provinces that are home to legendary former Northern Alliance commanders and leaders, both in the 1990s when Commander Massoud was alive, Professor Burhanuddin Rabbani, the former president, was alive, in post-2001 Afghanistan. These Northern Alliance leaders and commanders played a very big role helping the Americans topple the Taliban. Today, the dynamics have changed. Today, even if you go to Parwan province outside of Kabul, the capital city, Charikar, is surrounded by the Taliban. So it increasingly looks like the Taliban want to surround Panjshir province, surround all the areas that they fear, from which there will be resistance against them. It is also equally true that the Taliban have been able to recruit among Uzbeks, Tajiks, and Turkmens, because a lot of the leadership at a village district level in Takhar, Badakhshan, and elsewhere is from these commanders. I would also highlight the fact that when Badakhshan was taken over, except for the provincial capital, the Taliban managed to get control of, from gold mines in Ragistan to Lapis Lazuli mine in Kiraniminjan, to the salt coal and coal mines in the province of Takhar. These are two very strategic provinces. They have a border with Tajikistan, at least Takhar does. Badakhshan shares a border with Tajikistan as well as with China. And when Afghan soldiers fled the Taliban and crossed into Tajikistan, you heard from the Tajik president picking up a phone, calling his Afghan counterpart. You heard from the Russians. They are also worried about the Islamic State, about Daesh, because within the Taliban military structures, you do have foreign fighters, fighters from Central Asia, fighters from other parts of the world, who not only understands the language, the second and third generation, but they also have intermarriages. If you go to Kunduz province, which is the bread basket, which is the fruit basket of that region, the fighting also started at the peak of the melon and watermelon season, the harvest for cotton and wheat. So this war eventually is having a devastating impact on the poor of the poorest, the Afghan farmers. The fact that Taliban have made a deliberate attempt to capture the Sher Khan border crossing with Tajikistan. Now they operate that. They similarly launched a large-scale attack against the Hairatan port on the border with Uzbekistan. Now that border remains closed. They have made similar efforts, in Islam Qala, in Herat, in Torhundi, which is closer to Badghis, but it is in Herat. It also tells you that the Taliban want to be in control of financial resources. It helps them on the battlefield. It helps them with everything. So it is a very fluid situation. It's an extremely devastating blow to the Afghan national security forces, who have not been feeling betrayed that the Americans abandoned them, that there was no ceasefire, that Taliban didn't do anything, but they also feel let down by people in Kabul. They've been asking for supplies, for wood, for food, for wood in some cases.
Ammunition,
For water and ammunition.
reinforcements.
Exactly.
Right. Before I get into what the Americans are doing, what's happening in Iran now? I mean, we've seen both Staniczai-led Doha political office of Taliban delegation meeting with representatives of various Afghan groups, including the government. We've seen former ministers as well. A joint declaration coming out of Iran, which was hosted by Javad Zarif. Now, is this, while pretending to talk, they are still making, military gains and advances? Is this camouflage? I mean, what is the Taliban doing?
I think these talks are always welcomed. It's always good to have a communications channel. Afghans must not, stop talking, even though if it's painful. But at the same time, one must also understand that if these talks, be it in Doha, be it in Tehran, be it anywhere else, which I know there have been a lot of these activities, if they do not lead to a ceasefire, to a comprehensive ceasefire, if they do not end the bloodshed and killings and sufferings of Afghans, then quite tragically, they will be meaningless. And I think eventually you will see more and more Afghans, build more mistrust towards such events and talks. And we, at the same time, also have to understand that both the Taliban, the Afghan government, they have to put the suffering of the Afghan people ahead of everything else. The Afghan government says they've done everything. They've released prisoners, they have taken a number of measures, but the Taliban have done nothing. So eventually, I only see a credible peace process, one which leads to an immediate ceasefire, a permanent and comprehensive one. We cannot have a situation where battlefield leverage, battlefield gains can be used on the negotiating table, because the cost of that for the Afghan people will quite simply be too big. And Afghanistan comes from a very, very painful past, a past not too long ago. Everyone knows what happens when the state collapsed. Everyone knows what happens when the army and the security forces collapse. So if the bleeding, if the suffering of the Afghan people does not end anytime soon, I'm afraid Afghanistan will be seeing unprecedented levels of brutality and fighting for the months and years to come.
That is the fear. And you were talking about mistrust. So let me just play out another soundbite, this time from the Pentagon spokesperson, because there was a lot of reporting, Bilal, and I'll come to you after this soundbite, on the American vacation of the Bagram Air Base. And you were talking about history. Now, Bagram goes back even into the Soviet era. But this is what Kirby had to say when he was questioned a lot about how the Americans had vacated, even put off electricity and water, and not really told the commanders on the ground.
That the reason that the U.S. didn't inform the Afghans and the Afghan government of the exact time that the U.S. was going to leave Bagram is because of the concern about the Taliban and the potential for Americans to I guess, come under attack as they were leaving.
What I would say is the exact hour of departure was not divulged for operational security purposes. Because we want to, again, when we talk about this drawdown, we talk about it being safe and orderly. Safe's the first word. And for operational security reasons. And that's not different, Court, than other turnovers we've done in the past in Afghanistan.
But you're saying you didn't divulge it to the Afghan military or the Afghan government when the U.S. was leaving the base. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the concern is that the Afghans would have potentially, the Afghans have been the U.S. partner.
I think in general, we felt it was just better to keep that information as close hold as possible.
So, I mean, you see the signal or that sends to the Afghans that the concern is that by notifying them when the U.S. is turning a base over to them, that it's going to get to the Taliban. Like, I mean, you can understand where the...
I can't speak for how the Afghans interpreted that decision, but it was a decision made in the best interest of the safety and security of our people.
Bilal, safety and security of Americans, now no one can grudge them that. But I just wanted to ask you about another crucial factor, whether you like it or not, whether the Taliban making gains on the military battleground. Air support. Now, the Americans say that they will continue to support it over the horizon, and they have an aircraft carrier and bases in the Gulf, of course. But even today, when you're talking about what's happening in Kandahar, you have been reporting that the Afghan Air Force has been carrying out airstrikes in and around Kandahar. I mean, air support is crucial, right, for what's happening on the ground?
Well, absolutely. The Americans leave Afghanistan abandoning the chances of a peace process. They are not leaving Afghanistan with the peace process, with a comprehensive ceasefire. I mean, at the moment, you are talking about the lack of air support from the Americans, which was in shape of airstrikes, not only preventing the fall of major provincial capitals, districts, and bases, but also there was logistical support. You have a situation where the Americans often were dropping bread, sacks of potatoes, onion, rice, flour in the middle of the night in some of the most remote parts. They were also helping to evacuate Afghan soldiers, those who were wounded. So this is also a 20-year plus relationship of deeper friendships, generational, relationships. And I think that the problem with the Americans abandoning a place like Bagram in the middle of the night, not telling their Afghan counterparts, also have to do with the fact that they leave, Afghanistan with a lot of painful memories when there were Afghan soldiers turning their guns against the Americans. So it is an incredibly bad timing with bad ground realities. The Americans are leaving. Everyone was prepared within the government, outside. The Americans eventually will be pulling out. That was clear. But everyone thought that they should use whatever leverage they had with the peace process, which they didn't use, according to Afghan government officials.
No, nobody has confirmed it officially in India, but India has opened channels with the Taliban in Doha at a particular level. How do you and how do Afghans see India's role here? Because it seems like you're being completely pushed out by Pakistan or Pakistan-supported groups like the Taliban.
Well, India's relationship with Afghanistan is historical. It's very deep. The last 20 years, India's image in Afghanistan is a very constructive one, from building schools, roads, to parliament building. India's image is one of construction. India's been there. How India moves as a country to engage in the peace process, how India engaged with the Taliban, I wouldn't know at the moment. We're also waiting to see that. But India has been a very, a big part of the new Afghanistan over the last 20 years. And that is what Afghans would expect India to take greater ownership of the peace process. You also have to really think about the region. In the 1990s, when you had the civil war, and the last government in Afghanistan, President Najib's government, collapsed, the Mujahideen took over, and then subsequently you had the Taliban. This region was not, as prosperous as it is today in terms of economy. And then there's the issue of common threats and common dangers. So today that has changed, including for India. It will be very interesting to see how the regional dynamics play in the peace process. But I would hope, that is the hope of many Afghans, that India would take a bigger role in the peace process, and we will have to see how that goes.
How will it go vis-a-vis Pakistan? What is Pakistan's role currently in what seems like Afghanistan racing towards the abyss?
Well, the position of the Afghan government has always been very clear. It says that Afghanistan has the right to have relationships with everyone, including India, including all other neighbors. But the Afghan government, quite publicly actually, continues to accuse Pakistan of being a spoiler in the peace process. You would have heard from Afghanistan's National Security Advisor, Abdullah Mohib. You would have heard from President Ghani and others calling on Pakistan to do more in the peace process. For now, Pakistan is seen as a spoiler by the Afghan government here in Kabul. The Afghan government believes that Pakistan can do more to end the bloodshed and sufferings of Afghans. Pakistan, on the other hand, has come out quite publicly and said, we have lost our influence on the Taliban. This is what they've been saying, but we have seen Director General Inter-Services Intelligence, we have seen the Pakistan's Army Chief of Staff, we have seen Imran Khan, dealing quite frequently with senior Taliban leadership, whether that is them coming to Pakistan for visiting their fighters and consulting with the leaders and commanders, or whether you see senior leadership of Pakistani army flying frequently to Doha. But Kabul is not very happy, and it's making its position very clear quite publicly about how frustrated they are with Pakistan.
Just going back to India, because you said the hope is that India continues to play a part not only in Afghanistan's future, but in the peace process. How do you see India having played its foreign policy? I mean, we all know the $3.1 billion of development aid. We showed pictures earlier of the helicopters that were provided. I don't think that's going to come anytime soon. But in terms of engagement, if back channel with the Taliban is open, India has been engaging with all the erstwhile Northern Alliance leaders and all the major players in politics in Afghanistan. How do you see India's role?
Well, let's take the last 20 years. India's relationship, is not only helicopters. It's only not schools, not only roads. Let's also talk about how Afghan players like Rashid Khan and Muhammad Nabi and Mujib Zadran committed to the Indian Premier League. That is something that is had a major impact on people here in this country. You also have India providing Afghanistan with the home ground. As I said, India's image here is one of constructing parliament buildings and doing all that it has done with education and health. Thousands of Afghans continue to study in India, and for Afghans, India will always be, through the prism of Bollywood, through the prism of IPL cricket, and such things. And India has been an integral part of post 2001 Afghanistan. Building the new Afghanistan, the new state, the Afghan National Security Forces. But today, if you ask me what India should do, what Afghan officials and politicians and others are telling me, they continue to say that India should take greater ownership in the peace process.
Right. Earlier you were mentioning, of course, in a different context, that the Pakistani establishment was saying that the Taliban were not responding to them, or they couldn't control them. Now, is there any truth in, say, a faction of the Taliban showing its independence if not now, when they come into some kind of power structure in Afghanistan from ISI, from Rawalpindi, from GHQ, which do you think it's true?
Well, I think this is a question you should put to the Taliban leadership and to the Taliban spokesperson. But the position from Kabul has been very clear. And this is why you have a war of words between senior Afghan officials and senior Pakistani officials, because Kabul believes Islamabad has not done its part, that Islamabad have not condemned violence. They have not called for a comprehensive and permanent ceasefire, for example. So that mistrust, the gap in that mistrust is only growing. Pakistan has said that it's doing everything it can in the peace process, but Afghan officials are saying, don't tell me, show me, prove it. Stop treating the wounded Taliban soldiers in your hospitals, go after Taliban leaders, including the military ones. So that's all, out there. It's part of the bigger tension between Kabul and Islamabad, and this is the ground reality, that the Americans, the international community, leaves Afghanistan without a peace process, without a credible peace process. And this was the hope a few years ago. If you had asked me, everyone said, let's hope the Americans, the West, they do not make the mistake of the 1990s, that they do not abandon Afghanistan, that they do not turn a blind eye. Obviously, the last 20 years, mistakes have been made inside Afghanistan, from corruption to the political bickering among Afghan government officials and politicians, the lack of a cohesive peace strategy, among Afghan government officials as well as politicians, is something that shows you how the Afghans have been betrayed historically by the West, but they've also been let down very, very badly by incompetent governments and their own politicians.
Just picking up from that last point, and saw President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah at the White House. Before that, when Secretary Blinken came to Kabul, he literally let out the Riot Act, that note that he had handed over to President Ghani. Where do you see the Afghan government's future, especially the current, how it's led by President Ghani? How does that go now?
Well, we have to see that President Ghani's, government has been fighting on many different fronts. They have made a number of important sacrifices in the peace process, but the violence, the attacks have gone up. The Americans are withdrawing from Afghanistan militarily, which means it'll have a big impact on the psyche and morale of the Afghan National Security Forces. But at the same time, the political Kabul continues to be extremely divided. The political Kabul has not been able to provide the support that the Afghan National Security Forces needs and deserves. The political Kabul has not been able to create, a national strategy for peace process, like a roadmap. So there are things that Kabul has also failed to do, but there are also things that Kabul has tried and not got. But if you ask me today, what is it that every Afghan, from Kabul to a province, to a district, to a village, to a hamlet, wants? They all, with one voice, will tell you a comprehensive ceasefire. But people do not want the collapse of the state. People remember the 1990s. People don't want to go back to the days when you have a civil war. People don't want four currencies like there were. People take pride in the fact that over the last 20 years, you have your own airport that you can fly to the world from. You have one single currency, But Afghanistan's political crises and the lack of political cohesion is something that for which the Afghan government is responsible. The Afghan politicians are responsible. Those who have a voice are responsible for that.
Bilal Sarwary, absolute pleasure talking to you to gain a further perspective and understanding of what's going on the ground. And again, like we started this discussion, we hope the newest arrival in your family, Sula, will also be a harbinger of larger things for Afghanistan. Thank you, and we will speak to you more often and hopefully see you soon in Kabul. Bilal.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
And just a reminder to all our viewers to help support our kind of journalism. There is a link in the descriptor on YouTube where you can help us financially. To also follow our social media handles on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to get the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective. This is The Gist on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh. Revi.